Back when Warcraft Rumble was first released, we did a tier list rankings type video for the different leaders based on the perspective of a beginner progression kind of point of view. But now I want to do more of an overall leaders rankings where we do take things into consideration like talents and a more broad perspective of an overall rank for each leader instead of just the beginner point of view where we don't take talents into consideration. And in order to fit everything on the screen, I know this is going to bum all of you out, but I may have to pull myself off the camera. I know it's brutal, but we're going to get through this together. Okay, so anyway, we've got number 1, Baron Rivendare. I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of argument on this in terms of an overall leader. On something like this, we're probably going to take PvP into a little bit more of a consideration. Once somebody is past the very early stages of the game, they might be wondering what's going to give them the most viability in something like PvP. So we're going to weigh that a little bit more heavily than just a straight up first day I downloaded the game perspective, because who doesn't want to at least be viable in PvP? So Baron Rivendare, I think, is going to be a pretty well unanimously regarded as the best in PvP, and he's also very good in PvE because of the passive control that he gets here from his leader ability, where you have Army of the Dead that will periodically summon skeletons from buildings you control. And then he has a talent where you're going to get the constant flood of not only skeletons but skeletal mages, which can also fire at air. So it used to be people would drop like a Griffin Rider and they can just kind of smack down those skeletons, but when you constantly flood those skeletal mages, now that's no longer an option, and it's just such an insane flood of consistent gold value that makes Baron really, really hard to deal with. I actually don't even have a talent for him yet, and he's one of my lower ranked leaders. I've been trying to kind of learn all the different leaders in the game, but I'll definitely be playing him a lot more once I can unlock that talent. And then this is probably going to be a little bit of a hot take, but I've got Grommash at number 2, and I just think Bloodlust is so insane because you're getting 33% movement and attack speed. So not only can you hit lanes faster and engage faster, but attack speed is even better than damage, because if you get a 33% buff to your damage, you're going to be wasting a lot of damage on overkill. Like, for example, if you do 920 damage right here on my Grommash, if something has 400 HP when I hit it, I just wasted 520 damage. But attack speed allows you to get more attacks off and waste less of that overkill damage. So I just think Bloodlust is incredible to not only give it to him, but to also be constantly flooding it on the allies that are in his area as well. And then he has a ridiculous talent that I haven't acquired yet, but this mirror image. If your opponent is not ready to deal with that, and you can summon those 2 mirror images that are going to be just completely demolishing the front line, you can take so much control with Grommash and get so much consistent value out of Bloodlust to help yourself get insanely effective trades and snowball that gold economy. So a lot of people might disagree with me, but I really think Grommash is a top 3 overall leader. And in our last leader ranking video, we did have Tyrion as number 1, and I still kind of agree with that. I think from a beginner perspective of just kind of building up a push and getting consistent value, Tyrion is probably still number 1 for beginners. I'm going to drop him down a little bit, somewhere in that 3 to 4 range, but I do think he is still definitely viable, and you can build up some really cool pushes and cool strategies, synergizing with his healing and his sustain that he can bring to a front line with a cheap cost of 4. And then at number 4, similar to Grommash, I'm probably a little bit higher on Hogger than other people. And I think it's the fact that you can scale up all 3 of his most important stats. You got movement speed, attack speed, and then you have a talent right here that's going to also scale up his HP. So he becomes an absolute menace in the second half of a match. So what you want to do in the first half is just kind of hold serve and be consistent. Don't take any risks. And if you can get to good footing in the, even if you're just like even or a little bit behind, you're going to do so well in the second half of a match. And I think that's a really good mental state of mind to be in. It's like, okay, the longer this goes, the more times I cycle through, it's going to get better and better for me. So I really like the Hogger playstyle, as long as you build a synergistic deck that you can cycle through and play him 4 or 5 times a match. He is going to start to be absolutely crazy. And he also has the splash damage cleave here on the A1, so you can't even drop things like chickens to deal with him effectively. He can just absolutely maul once you've played him a few times. Very consistent value and also intuitive for beginners. Then as we move into that next tier from like that 5 to 8 range of the mid tier, I'm going to start it with Blood Mage Thanos because he kind of forces some stress on your opponent. Like once he's on the battlefield, you kind of have to deal with him, and he can sustain himself with lifesteal while also pairing really well with things like Arcane Blast, where you can spam it a couple times to scale up his stats, and he can really start to be an absolute menace that snowballs out of control if someone isn't paying attention and dealing with him effectively. So I think the fact that he applies that pressure makes him pretty fun to utilize, and he can also do some crazy things in PvE. If you could scale him up to that full buff of 10 levels, it just becomes absolutely comical to watch him solo maps. Then Old Merkai is a little boom or bust. There's a few on here that are boom or bust where you kind of have to wait, get a very specific rotation, and then like dump all your gold at once or do some super specific mechanic. And Merkai can be a little bit difficult because of that. So you'll be sitting at 4 or 5 gold, and now you've got to sit here for 6 seconds and do nothing while your opponent just kind of is still dropping things and taking control because you're waiting for that Merkai spam to come out where you have the whole map getting flooded with the Murlocs. It's super fun, and it can definitely be super strong, especially if you flood a few Murlocs in a different direction in their own lane, and then as they're approaching a tower, you drop a Quillbore to tank for the Murlocs, and then you just kind of passively for 2 gold get completely demolished a tower. So a lot of fun plays here to make with Merkai, but because of the rotation required, really not super intuitive for beginner players, and he can be a little bit difficult to get consistent value out of. Likewise with Sylvanas, she can be insane and she can really swing the battlefield, but the problem is once you're playing against people who really know what they're doing, they're gonna just demolish her when you play her. They're gonna drop a safe pilot on her, or they're gonna have some spell ready or some stone hoof that charges and deals with her. So as long as they are prepared to deal with the harpy that she spawns and not really let her crank out a ton of damage, she's going to be a little bit of an underwhelming leader that's a little bit easier to deal with than some of the other options, but she definitely can be super strong if they don't deal with her effectively. And then at number 8, I've got Sneed because his economic snowball is just so fun. Like if you're in a position where you can control things, like once you get an advantage, they're not going to come back against you. And it's kind of the opposite playstyle to something like Hogger, where you do kind of want to get a lead. You want to kind of put pressure on yourself to start out well and control those chests and get ahead of your opponent in the gold count, because once you do that, you're really going to start to strangle them and they're not going to be able to catch up with you as long as you have Sneed kind of taking advantage of that siege playstyle and controlling the different resources on the map. And then this one's going to be probably also a little bit of a hot take here, putting Rend at number 9. You can probably go anywhere like in the 4 to 10 range and probably make an argument for Rend. He's going to be one of those ones that has a lot of different opinions. Some people think he is absolute double S tier god, and some people think he's very, very underwhelming. I think, I could be swayed to move him up a little bit for sure, because I do like how he synergizes with some of the flying units, and they do have some powerful options like Drake and Whelp Eggs, where if they're costing 3 and 2 respectively, that obviously becomes very strong. But he does cost 6, and he's a little bit underwhelming as a mini himself on the battlefield. And I feel like if I'm going to go with an underwhelming mini, I would rather have something like a Baron, where I just have the consistent passive of the skeletal mages flooding everywhere, as opposed to having to spend 6. Like if Rend was 5, I feel like I can move him up a little bit, but I just don't feel like I'm getting enough value with him at that cost of 6. So I really have to get bonus value elsewhere, like with a Drake or something, and it just makes it a little bit difficult to flow. So I'm going to put him a little bit lower than most people probably would. And sorry, I kind of got talking and got rattling here. I should pull these up as I'm talking about them for sure. I apologize for that. But yeah, Cairn, he's consistent. He just kind of is what he is. He's tanky. He can resurrect after you deal with him and give you more value. He's just a super consistent front line because he's got the AoE, he's got the stun, he's got a pretty good health pool. He can resurrect himself once after being dealt with, and then he also has other talents to make the CC a little bit better or move faster. But I think the reincarnation one is just kind of going to be the most consistent value on him. So yeah, I don't know, it's not like he's trash or anything. He's just kind of there, and it is what it is, and he's a decent frontline brawler. Then I did move a Jaina up a few spots for this rankings list because I feel like people are starting to realize how powerful Blizzard is, And the fact that you can kind of get her out on the map for a cheap cost of 3 and then completely demolish anything they have with a boosted up beefy bonus version of a blizzard is going to be really, really scary for your opponent to deal with. So I don't want to put Jaina like dead last. I do think she has some potential for plays, and at a 3 cost, she really is a pretty decent ranged damage dealer. If she costs 4, she would be underwhelming. If she costs 2, she would be amazing. So I do think she is a pretty solid DPS value there at a cost of 3, as long as you can keep a decent front line ahead of her and then have something like a blizzard ready to get insane value while she's out on the field. Then moving into my Ev, it's going to look bad at number 12, but you can really get an insane amount of power out of my Ev. So I wouldn't say my Ev is horrible by any means, as long as you've got the skill and the game awareness and experience to make some impactful plays and cycle through your deck, build a strategy properly around my Ev. You really probably have the highest like skill ceiling with getting the most impact out of being a good player with my Ev. So as long as you get the cost down to like 2 or 3, all of a sudden you can make some very, very efficient plays. It's just kind of annoying that you can't play my Ev as often as some of the other leaders maybe, because you default at that cost of 6 and you really need to cycle down to drop that cost. But even if you get down to a value of just 3 or 4, you can get some pretty decent plays here with my Ev. So even though rank 12, definitely some potential and not horrible. Then for the last tier at 13 and 14, again, I think this is pretty easy to come up with in the final tier here, because I think General Drac and Charlgut are just kind of too hard to play well consistently. Obviously, getting the big damage boost to the elemental stuff can be fun with General Drac, and if somebody isn't ready to kind of deal with that and they don't have like resistant minis or something, you can just blast through and get a lot more damage out of things like Blizzard as well, even more so than Jaina. I mean, if you drop like a Blizzard where the General Drac is on a front line or something, all of a sudden you're gonna absolutely wreck. But I think General Drac should probably cost 4 because he's super slow and clunky and a little bit underwhelming as a mini at a cost of 5. And then at dead last, I am going to put Charlgut, not because Charlgut is necessarily unplayable or horrible. It's just, you know, you have to split hairs when doing rankings, and I would probably end up putting her down here just because of how the deck plays. It's so much different than every other leader, which is cool. I like that they have different mechanics in the game, but I just feel like it's so hard to compete with the super consistent value that some of the other leaders can bring. But I mean, Charlgut can be a top 3 leader. If you get the right cycle and you play the deck right at the right time, you can flood the map with like 15 gold worth of value and put together an insanely scary presence on the map. So definitely playable, not complete and utter unusable trash, but if I'm splitting hairs, I'm going to put Charlgut 14. So that is my current overall leader rankings in Warcraft Rumble. Remember to subscribe on your way out if you enjoy daily Warcraft Rumble content, and I will see you soon in the next video. Thanks for watching. Peace.